This is the fourth episode of the serie Futures, in which we interview key players in the design scene working in the public sector in Europe. We have planned this series with Anni Leppänen as part of her larger research for understanding the current change in the government and the design sector. We wanted to envision collaboratively how this could be in the year 2030. This series has interviews describing cases in Denmark, Sweden, Estonia, and the UK.
Hello, my name is Anni Leppänen, and I am the chair of Julkismuotoilijat, which is a community of practice for designers working inside the government in Finland. Julkismuotoilijat is part of a wider international community of design in government that the UK government launched 7 years ago. This was also the same year I and Mariana founded the Finnish government design community, together with the other pioneers. I am a strategic designer, and I have been working in the government for the past 15 years. And I met Eloise, who is today's guest, while I was studying design at Aalto University 10 years ago. We were on the same studio course called Design for Government. This year actually marks the 10th anniversary year for the Design for Government course. And personally, the course formed the foundation for my mindset and skills as a strategic designer in government. I think that this symbiotic relationship has been helping to push design in government in Finland.
Eloise Smith-Foster is an activist and designer expert in strategic foresight. She worked in the future of Wales in 2030, and this work has since been recognized as an international benchmark for future thinking, best practice, and impact. She tells in this interview about the future work done for the voluntary sector and her views on the future. They have designed a process that mixes different methods, future thinking, and human-centered design.
So, I met Eloise at the Design for Government course all those years ago, and we were in the same project team, and that was working with the Ministry for Agriculture and Forestry. And I learned so much from Eloise already back then. So I have been following her career since then and been really impressed by her activist initiatives and critical thinking and holistic approach to designing for social impact. So I felt that she has been diving into topics and approaches that are very relevant for the future's process of design in government.
My name is Mariana Salgado. This is Diseño y Diáspora.
Hello, I'm Eloise Smith-Foster. I'm a freelance researcher, service and strategic designer, and futures thinker. I'm also a lead service designer at the agency Futurists and co-founder of Design Activists for Regenerative Futures. And I've been involved in social and climate justice activism for some years, which has had a big influence on my design. And I know the topics we're going to talk about today, so I wanted to bring that in.
And what is this collective doing, the one with the activism inside?
Yeah, so it's on a bit of a regenerative pause at the moment, but it's a voluntary collective of people, mainly creatives, designers, who are passionate about more just, liberatory and safe futures for all and contributing to that in different ways. And we use the term activism, that's very open to interpretation. So it's a real mix of sort of students, academics, practitioners, mostly in design. We come together to host dialogues, events, workshops, to have a kind of open and vulnerable space to dig into some big questions together in community and think about how we can co-create those types of more liberatory futures.
Perfect. And this is in parallel that the work that you do as a freelancer or sometimes as a consultant, right?
Yes, exactly. So it's a sort of voluntary thread of work that I've been exploring with some co-organizers who are very passionate about this topic, and it kind of gives us a freeing space to explore topics and questions that it can be quite challenging to explore in the constraints of being in a business or the public sector. And a lot of the people who joined, we discovered, were quite feeling quite frustrated at the pace of change in their organizations, were very interested in climate justice and the green transition, and sort of struggling with the slower pace of change, and wanting to look at how they could take more action or decenter humans more, or kind of take an approach that would be perceived as more radical, or perhaps too radical for the context they're in. So it's been a great space to explore this topic of regenerative design and regenerative futures, and what methods and approaches we can apply to progress that together.
Yeah, I think that it's great that you're doing like more than just maybe the main job, that you're volunteering and you're kind of working on the topics that you feel passionate and finding those people. I think it's a trend that we are also seeing around in our design community here in Finland, that many people are thinking about the different ways they can contribute, but also like how they can sustain creativity maybe while working for the government. So they might be kind of getting into these sort of things. So really kind of demonstrating some of the trends and ideas we're seeing in the design community these days. Your story. Mm-hmm.
Well, for example, my podcast is like that, no? It's
Yes,
voluntary work
exactly.
that I have done many years in parallel to the work in the public sector. We would like to know about one project that you feel that represents your work in the public sector.
I wanted to talk about Voluntary Sector Futures, an initiative that started in 2021, but it builds on previous collaborations and continued after I stepped away. This was an initiative I led in partnership with the team at Futurists, the Wales Council for Voluntary Action, and the Third Sector Support Wales, with a number of other partners across sectors, including the Future Generation Commissioner for Wales and the Welsh Government, and many voluntary sector organisations. So it was a very unique, ambitious cross-sector collaboration, co-led across these different partners. And the focus was thinking about the kind of society that the voluntary sector would like to see and bring to life in 2030 and beyond, and thinking about how we are emerging, how Wales is emerging from the pandemic, and kind of acknowledging the crises and not wanting to just survive, but to thrive and really think about the futures they want to see and lean into as sort of beyond the recovering stage.
So what did you do with all these fantastic consortium?
So we designed a process that really mixed different methods. So bringing in human-centered design, but extending and enriching that with futures thinking and systems thinking, and being guided by design justice principles, which focus on centering those most impacted by the work and being led by those most impacted, and coming into the context with humility as a facilitator, and really respecting the lived experience and aspirations of everyone involved in this big cohort. So it involved doing research, so horizon scanning. We were investigating seeds of change in Wales and beyond, and seeds of change are kind of slices of positive preferred futures that we can already see today, either existing or emerging, but not at a big scale. So it could be local food resilience community groups. It could be sort of e-bikes taking off in your city and more people moving to sort of healthy, active transport. So we gathered these seeds of change, and they became stimulus for conversation and sort of futures methodologies in a series of participatory sessions in 2021, predominantly with the voluntary sector. So we had representatives from all sorts of organizations focused on youth and racial justice, health, creativity, from organizations like Scouts to more grassroots organizations. So it was a very diverse group coming together to reflect on these seeds of change emerging on Wales and starting to bring in their voice about how do they want these seeds to grow and evolve, what kind of future is possible and preferred when we look at these seeds, and what are the impacts we want to have on our communities and our organizations. So we had really powerful, challenging conversations together about this direction.
And when you have 80 organizations that come together to think the future, do you have any friction?
Yes, that's a very good question. So it was a series of sort of smaller participatory sessions over a number of months. And absolutely friction can arise. And it's a really good question because I've been thinking a lot about the role of the sort of futures facilitator, and something I tried to bring in the work is a trauma-informed approach, because futures is not about, ignoring inequities and injustices. It's about thinking more expansively about time, acknowledging traumas within communities and past inequities and how they can play out in the present and extend into the future, and how we're actually challenging those paradigms. And so I think this is where the topic of power is really critical to think about. So we need to be really conscious doing this work of, who gets to do the futures thinking, who's in the room, who's not in the room. And when a diverse group is in the room, whose voice is being centered, whose opinion is being taken most seriously. How can we challenge patterns of inequity in the space as we do the futures work, and already lean into more liberatory futures in what we're embodying together in how we do the work and facilitate and be in partnership. And so that's something I'm very conscious of, is there is a great risk as a futurist or futures facilitator of actually repeating problematic colonial paradigms and extending sort of colonial patterns into the future and actually causing harm. So dismantling and challenging those is really critical.
But if you have to advise to someone that have not done this fantastic work that you have done, what did you learn? I mean, how do we go with these inequalities, right? Because it's always like that the most outspoken are there, and there's always someone that we are not inviting because it just didn't occur to us.
Yeah, I think looking into trauma-informed and trauma-responsive research and design is a great field to gain learnings and inspiration from. That's an area I've been looking into. And so there's some quite practical things we can do, just recognizing who's in the space. And so how can we facilitate to reduce harm as much as possible? So that could be thinking about, creating small groups, breakout rooms, creating a strong atmosphere of agency and consent. So having, people don't have to join in with things, they have choice of how they join in. There's neurodivergence. Maybe people want to participate individually rather than in group. Maybe people need to receive questions and a thorough agenda in advance, so they know what to expect, and there's someone who takes time to process. And it's also calling out potentially harmful behaviours, having community guidelines in place that people are aware of and engage with and commit to, that ensure safety of people in the room. But being prepared to kind of challenge potentially harmful behaviours. And I think having a co-facilitator and other facilitators support you is really important. And it can also be thinking about, do you represent the people you're working with? So it was really critical in this project that it was shaped and led by organisations in Wales, by people in Wales. So my key colleague, Susanna Ayupa and Anna Nichols, were based in different parts of Wales, and they were key in leading the work and facilitating these communities as well. And they have that key cultural knowledge. Yeah, maybe I'll pause there.
That was great. Thank you. Yeah, that was super good. And what was the result? Because we talk about that you did these workshops, you facilitate them, and how do you wrap up something like that?
Good question. So the next stage after creating this multiple visions of the future, and something key about the work, it's not about homogenizing into one vision. We created lots of seeds of change and quite a extensive articulation of a world where many worlds could fit, in the words of Arturo Escobar, who talks about the pluriverse. So from that, the question remains, how do we get there together as a collective across sectors? And some aspects of the vision include the voluntary sector is often referred to as the third sector in the UK. So that tells you a lot, that it's not as well funded and resourced and potentially not as well respected as the other sectors. So a key part of the vision was the sector wanted a more community-centric, caring society where the voluntary sector is really recognised as a key partner in touch with people's needs on the ground, that can actually be a bridge to bigger institutions like the public sector, letting them know what the needs and aspirations of communities are, and being a strong partner and a guide. So we use the 3 Horizons framework to help develop goals for how the Wales Council for Voluntary Action could support the sector, and what sort of goals the sector wanted to work towards within this vision, what actions it wanted to take. So we use that to think about, here's the vision on Horizon 3 in 2030 and beyond. And here's where we are now. What's the current situation? What's blocking us? What's stopping us? What are the seeds we can grow and kind of water and build on? And then Horizon 2, we think about as the bridge. How do we get from where we are now to that future? And so that could include action ideas and kind of commitments for working together differently. And those conversations were really powerful and resulted in an action plan that's captured in the report, which is open access. All the things I've been talking about are available if you want to take a look. And this in turn informed WCVA's business strategy for the next 5 years. So WCVA, the Wales Council for Voluntary Action, are an infrastructure organisation that educates, supports and funds the whole of the voluntary sector across Wales. So they're thinking about, how can we respond? What's our role in working towards this vision and responding to these goals and ideas for action that the communities want? How can we better connect, and what does that mean for our strategy? And they reshaped their strategy for the next 5 years. And that was signed off by all the county voluntary councils across every region of Wales much more rapidly in the past, because it was so representative of what they wanted to do and where they wanted to to go in the future.
You mentioned that there was this actor part of the work, Future Generations for Wales. Could you tell us a little bit more about this interesting sounding organization?
The commissioner.
Yes, all of this work we did is in part made possible because of the Future Generations Commissioner for Wales. So in 2015, there was an act established in Wales that ensured public bodies in Wales are accountable to a sustainable development principles and considering future generations in the work they do. And from that act, this commissioner was established who holds the public bodies accountable, and public service boards were developed across Wales. So this is fantastic because it's really triggered conversations and ripple effects across Wales about thinking more long-term and thinking more deeply about sustainability and the impact of our work and policies on future generations. And it includes sort of a set of principles and guidance and has futures thinkers who support the public sector to use these types of methods and think and work more long term. And we actually, in the workshops, someone introduced themselves as being present on behalf of future generations. So I felt that was so powerful. You know, this isn't just individuals alone holding the torch for sustainability and regeneration, but it's actually brings it into a more systemic level and supports creation of collective will to think and work in a different way and orient towards well-being and be measured by that and the well-being of future generations rather than just GDP or profit or cost savings, etc.
This interview is part of the lists Futures, Futuros, Reino Unido y Diseño, Diseño y Gobierno, y Diseño y Políticas Públicas, and D&D in English. The lists can be found in Spotify, YouTube, and our website. Also, you can contact if you are looking for material on a specific topic and you cannot find it. We might have done it, but it is difficult to find. We always want to know what you are looking for. One of the things I love from this interview is that we are learning from the voluntary sector on how they approach their future work. Too often, when we are choosing from whom to learn in the public sector, we tend to look at the work done in the private sector. In this series, we did not want to do so because we know we can also learn from others. Where to look for inspiration is also a political statement. We do a lot of work in the government inviting and participating the voluntary sector, at least in Finland. But I like this work because it is the other way around. They have the lead and the public organizations took part. There is a difference and we should be able to collaborate under different frameworks. Let's continue listening to Eloise that has a lot more to tell us.
So we are seeing that in the work of designers, it's not anymore just about being human-centered or even user-centered, but it's about considering even future generations. And what we have maybe also touched a little bit upon is the kind of life-centered or planetary-centered approach and kind of considering the different actors even beyond humans. So I don't know if that was at all present in this case or perhaps in any of your other work you've done.
Yeah, so this is a good question I'm thinking about a lot, and I must confess I still fall into an anthropocentric lens too much, more than I would like. So I think this is part of the work, is to be in community with others who will call us out and have a reflective practice and acknowledge what we're doing. That is still a big challenge, decentering the human in the work. There were definitely seeds of change, and the vision was thinking a lot about climate resilience, ecology, health of communities in connection with health of ecosystems and nature, and sort of more commons-based and community ownership of land, which there's lots of evidence to show that that does improve the health of lands when communities are, responsible for the land that they live on and are kind of stewards of that land. So it did go in that direction, but I think I'm in a space since then of trying to bring that into the conversation and find ways of integrating that angle more. It's still a sort of live challenge. I think it's something that I think of as one of the biggest power shifts, and bringing in more of a decolonial lens where you're really decentering the human and thinking about, what if?
And be individual.
Yeah, exactly. How do we bring more agency to nature and different beings? There's a really good example to make this a bit more tangible. In Sheffield, there's a project called the River Don Project, where they're aiming to give the river personhood, which would be the first time that's happened in the UK, I think. And so that raises lots of questions, like what does that mean if the river is a person and it's damaged, or abused the way a person is abused? What are the ramifications of that? So I think these are really interesting thought experiments, but I'd love to see it pushed even further, and I'm interested to explore that space.
Yeah, this has been done already in Ecuador, for example.
Fantastic. Yeah. Lots of other countries are well ahead of the UK and really leading the way on this.
I was wondering, since we studied together also, Eloise, that they didn't exactly teach us all these things back in the day when we were in university. So what has been your journey, or kind of like how would you describe this experience of like what it has been happening in the past maybe 10 years or a bit less since leaving university? Like all these things you are now explaining that are part of your work and part of your thinking, it was really not exactly present in our studies. So this must mean that there's a huge change happening. So how have you experienced? Have you kind of been shaken by this change in some way?
Yeah, that's a good question. I definitely see lifelong learning as key, because there's so much I've explored and grown into since my studies, and learned and unlearned. And I think you use the word shaken, and we talked about sort of blurred boundaries. And it makes me think about, that's a huge one. I think that the boundaries are kind of melting between personal life and activism and professional life. They're kind of false binaries. And I'm seeing and really feeling that myself. We have the genocide happening in Palestine with the UK complicit. And I'm thinking about, boycott, divestment and sanctions. What does that mean in activism? What does it mean in design? How am I blocking or perpetuating or being complicit within my design work to, settler colonialism? And how can I be part of stopping that and supporting liberation? So I think, there's a lot of designers that I'm speaking to who are really struggling with that right now, and a lot of people generally just feeling powerless. And I think this partly speaks to what we were talking about earlier, being trauma informed in our work and acknowledging people come into the space. It's not just about institutional injustice or inequities. it's on all levels. People are affected by wider systems and communities that they're part of, by what's happening in the news. They could be coming in, with a lot going on for them. So I think we need to be, I've just been learning a lot about how to integrate my climate and social justice work into my professional work and kind of break down those boundaries. And I think one of the other shifts that's part of this is designers getting more interested in strategy and systems thinking. So there's a sort of smaller but growing field of systemic design, really leaning into systems change practices, looking at the societal context, the meta context, the global context, whilst human-centered design has traditionally been quite stuck in that lens of individualism and looking at single users rather than looking at things collectively, or looking at, if we design for this single user's needs, what unintended consequences could that have on other user groups? So I think this is really key. If we talk about regeneration or the green transition, for example, there's a lot of talk of reducing carbon emissions and electric vehicles, but actually those materials are being extracted from the Democratic Republic of Congo and causing harm. So if we only focus in human-centered design on the end user who's going to use the vehicle and reduce their emissions, we're centering a really privileged point of view and could be causing and have been causing a lot of harm. So I think this is where understanding of your own positionality and power, both globally, for example, I'm in the global north, so that brings a certain responsibility, and in relation to whoever you're working with is really important, and combining that with systems thinking and a more systemic lens to wrap around your design training is really valuable.
So you kind of answer our question, because we were going to ask you, do you think that you're able to influence the future? And I think that was already replied. What are the biggest changes that you are now seeing or experiencing? How is design in government changing, in your opinion, or how would you say it should be changing towards 2030s?
Or design for societal contexts. We can also widen that from the government as well.
Yeah, thanks. So this is a really interesting question. I just want to acknowledge most of my recent work has been in other sectors, although I have done work in the public sector. So I'll put forth my perspective from the UK and what I know, but I think it's good to just reflect on this makes sense to the listeners wherever they are in the world. Things may be very, very different, what's needed. So what I'm seeing is, as we've mentioned, this design for planet has exploded, especially in the last 5 years. And I know people have had a lot of challenges in all spheres trying to apply that in their work. And as we've discussed, this links to, I think this could be really powerful, but needs to have this sort of lens of considering power, inequity, and ultimately decolonization, so that it doesn't become greenwashing and just focused on carbon metrics.
I was wondering if you have any tips for design-minded civil servants working within the government who are interested in design for planet, and like who should they be inviting or collaborating or seeking out to work together with around design for planet? Like, who should designers in government be kind of approaching about this? Because I'm sure that they can't do it themselves. This is more like an ecosystem level thing. So
yeah, I mean, I think it really depends on your context. So you need to identify who's relevant. But I'd probably start with this question of who is going to be most impacted by the work you're doing. Ideally, they should be leading and participating in the work. So this could be, there's like land back initiatives in certain parts of the world, or recommonsing initiatives where communities have come together to try and reclaim land and stewardship of the land, and really thinking about how they take care of their ecosystem. And those are often grassroots groups who, you know, they are closest to the challenges and best placed to see what's needed. So I would want to connect with those groups if you're kind of based in a bigger institution. So it's quite a similar message to the Wales Council for Voluntary Action message, in a way of connecting to the communities and groups most impacted or most vulnerabilized by sort of the ecological and climate crisis that's happening, who is most struggling with that right now.
Yeah. Well, but the other point is to demonstrate that if you work with these communities, it's really bringing a value, right? Because some of the people working inside the government, they might think that they are not going to get new ideas from this type of co-design or co-working.
Yeah, I think approaching this work with humility is really important. That lived expertise and experience is as valuable or more valuable than sort of academicized expertise that's detached from the problems and the root of the problems. So I think that's going back to this topic of what's helpful for designers, or shifts that would be great to see moving towards 2030, is leaning into humility and recognizing your scope of practice when you need to bring in experts from other disciplines, experts, lived experts, and being very reflective about how you're using your power and positionality, and what power you have to make change.
I was thinking, listening to you, I feel like designers should be like constantly reflecting, which is very essential to us. And I love this book by Schön on reflective practitioner, really great book. And I was wondering if you have anything you can share about like what are your reflective practices? Like how do you, in your daily life or weekly life, how do you keep being reflective and also being creative? Like how to stay creative? You are doing all these volunteer gigs and things like, and most of us working inside government are often like maybe kind of restrained in working in creative ways. So do you have any tips on like how to embrace creativity and reflection in the daily life? How do you keep doing it?
So I feel like one of the things I keep coming back to is collectives and community. I think we can't do any of this alone. And, I've struggled with this in the past, being too individualistic about trying to progress things. And, that can really burn people out. So acknowledging that, yes, we can fractals, and we can have greater ripple effects by teaming up with others, and that can really validate us and amplify our voice and amplify what we're doing. And that can be out of the workplace if you can't find it in the workplace. So I think a huge part of my learning has come from activism, and also giving me strength to find my voice and speak about certain topics in the professional sphere. And those communities hold me accountable as well, and help me to reflect and challenge myself by contrast between what's happening on the streets or in these activist groups compared to what's happening, or the types of conversations happening in so-called or certain professional spheres. So find your group, even if it's just one peer who you can discuss these topics with. And I think just a last point on this also connects to the topic of what would be great to see in design evolving is a stronger ethical practice. So if we look at other fields like social work and counselling, people have to have clinical supervisors. There is a really strict code of conduct, and people can be, have their qualification or their kind of authority removed. And we don't have anything like that in design, those structures of accountability around reflection and growth when it comes to kind of ethics and our ethical stance. And you can see that in AI, for example, and design in relation to that, how ethics goes out the window.
So what do you recommend us to read, listen, or watch in relation to these topics?
Oh, yes. So many things, I think.
With 2 or 3, we are fine.
Yeah. I think Monica Bielskita Protopia Frameworks is really great guidance. Pupil Bisht has done amazing work around decolonizing futures. Both their work is online on Medium, very accessible. Design for the Pluriverse by Arturo Escobar is fantastic. And Adrian Mary Brown, Emergent Strategy, as just some of the things I've been inspired by, which I think are really relevant to our topic.
I have also interviewed Arturo in this podcast, so you can read the book or else look at the
Oh, fantastic. Yeah, brilliant book. Really rich insight.
Okay, that's great. Well, thanks a lot.
Thanks for joining us.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. Lovely to talk to you.
What is this future process that we keep mentioning in this series? It is something we started last year as we began to notice that things are changing for design in government. We have come a long way in 7 years. Much more design and designers are working in government these days. Yet with economic and security crisis, we're experiencing more pressure to justify our role in creating impact for the society. And this is why we, as the Finnish government design community, chose to launch a futures process to understand the changes we are experiencing, and also to build a stronger agency for the future, to actively be involved in negotiating what kind of futures we want to be involved in making. These 5 episodes with Mariana have been one really important part of our futures process. With these interviews, we have wanted to collect stories and thoughts from practitioners to create a critical discussion around the future of design in government and our impact in the world.
There are many ways to think about the future, and I found revolutionary the fact that Wales has a commissioner of the future generations to represent the ones that have not yet been born. This is tangible, this is concrete action. How can future thinking work? They asked themselves, and the answer was being present on behalf of future generations, having a person with a salary and a mandate to represent a population that does not vote, that is not currently consulted as part of the creation of new policies. The silent one, the ones that have not yet a voice. I think this is something that we need to copy in many countries, but I definitely would like to see this idea in Finland. Eloise poses the question, who is going to be more impacted in the work you are doing? And perhaps they are not persons but plants or animals. Perhaps they have not yet been born. So we have to think how we make a space in the design work to listen to them. As always, the music of this podcast is by Antonio Zimmerman. Sound design is by Andy Fecci. This podcast is published with Creative Commons license with attributions. This was Diseño y Diáspora. You can follow us on our social media channels in YouTube, Instagram, or Twitter, or visit our website. Remember to recommend us and recommend our books. Stay tuned for more. We've got lots in store. Till next time, goodbye and design some more.